Well, U.S.-led efforts to mediate an end to the fighting in Ukraine have been intensifying in recent weeks, with Russia yet to give its response to the latest peace proposals. Now, when the Kremlin launched its war almost 4 years ago, many expected it to be over in days or even weeks. While tactics have changed, Russian President Vladimir Putin's objectives have not. Moscow still wants to make Ukraine part of its sphere of influence, but the U.S. is hopeful that it can convince Putin to stop his war in Ukraine and to accept a draft peace plan.
Russia's war in Ukraine has been grinding on for almost 4 years, with thousands of lives lost and destruction that will cost billions of euros to fix. Russian troops now occupy large swathes of territory in Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson, as well as all of Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014. And for now, Vladimir Putin is unwilling to give this territory back to Ukraine. But it's thought that there are pathways for Russia's leader to change his plans. The cost of the war has been great for both Kyiv and Moscow. Western sanctions against Russia have already considerably weakened its economy, and it could get worse for Moscow if tougher sanctions are imposed, particularly on its energy sector. Among them are a US threat to impose 100% tariffs and other sanctions on countries that continue to purchase Russian oil if a ceasefire isn't reached. Another economic blow to Moscow could be the use of hundreds of billions of euros in frozen assets by Western nations to help Kyiv. These could make paying for Russia's war a difficult task. And if Western allies provide further military aid to Ukraine, long requested by Kyiv, the Ukrainians believe it can help them reclaim its lost territory and deter Russia in the future. Further strengthening Ukraine, apart from weapons, could be an initiative for a European-led coalition to protect Ukrainian airspace, referred to as a Sky Shield. Another route that could lead to Putin ending his war in Ukraine is his relationship with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. China has maintained a neutral stance since Russia began its war in Ukraine. However, it has been selling dual-use technology, components that can be used by civilians and the military, to Russia. This gives the Chinese leader Xi Jinping sway over Vladimir Putin. For now, there's been no indication this is on the cards. Back in Ukraine, while efforts to end the war move at a solid pace, another winter of war drudges on.
And we have team coverage now. I'm joined by our correspondents, Sergei Satanovsky and Anchal Vora. Anchal is in Brussels. Sergei is in Riga. He is not in Russia. You may remember DW is banned from reporting in Russia. And Sergei, I want to start with you. After that diplomatic marathon that we saw here in Berlin, there has been a big diplomatic push yet again this week. And the question again is, what will Moscow do? Do you think that any of these threats that we saw in that report, such as more sanctions, will they convince Vladimir Putin to accept this plan?
Well, the economic arguments actually sound pretty strong. First of all, the potential U.S. sanctions and the ones that have already been imposed on two major Russian oil giants, Lukoil and Rosneft, which account for more than half of Russia's oil exports. So the potential impact on the Russian economy could be significant, but only if those sanctions are actually enforced and the Russian major oil buyers such as India and China do not dodge those sanctions. Now, whether a big diplomatic push could convince Putin to end this war. For now, the Kremlin says it is waiting for the White House to brief it on the latest talks. But today, for example, Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov made it clear that the Kremlin's position on the presence of foreign troops, for example, European troops in Ukraine, hasn't changed, and Moscow has always opposed any deployment of NATO country troops in Ukraine, whether as part of NATO itself or under the banner of security guarantees for Ukraine.
Anshal, let me ask you, after what we saw in the last couple of days with this attempt at diplomacy to bring us a peace plan, I mean, can you answer the question, what is the European strategy here?
Well, from the beginning, the Europeans have been saying they'll support Ukraine for as long as it takes. That has baffled experts and journalists alike. What does that actually mean? However, it does indicate to longer-term support. What does that mean? Let's unravel that. It means training Ukrainian forces. It means helping them with finances they need. It means providing them with weapons they need. European strategy in the current context is to keep supporting Ukraine's armed forces become stronger and so strong in a way that they are a difficult enemy for Russia to keep fighting and tire out Russia instead. And that doesn't mean they don't want peace. They definitely want peace. They're quite desperate for it. But remember, Europeans have been on the table in the past when assurances were offered to Ukraine and Russia has violated those agreements. So they actually don't see whether, even asking Ukraine to make any kind of territorial or other sacrifices would unveil lasting peace or not.
Yeah, and Sergei, let's talk about territory. We know that a key unresolved point is what will happen to Ukrainian territory that's currently occupied by Russia. Are there really any compromises here from Vladimir Putin's point of view?
Well, Russia's foreign ministry said it outright that Moscow is rejecting any compromises over the occupied territories. In other words, the Russian army plans to stay in the areas of already controlled. It already controls of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, for example, as well as Crimea, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Moreover, Putin said that if Ukrainian forces don't withdraw on their own from the administrative borders of the Donbas region that Russia hasn't occupied yet, the Russian army will take those areas by military force, and that means that Moscow intends to keep those territories. And the idea of a buffer zone, which has been discussed a lot these days, has not been negotiated between Moscow and Washington, or at least Russia doesn't acknowledge it publicly.
And Anshal, we know that Europe is on the same page when it comes to the fact that everyone wants Vladimir Putin to stop. But there is one big sticking point, and that is using Russian assets to help Ukraine, frozen assets at the moment. This week is going to be, it could be a make or break moment for the future of those assets. Tell us about that.
That's absolutely right. And ironically, this is also, one of the biggest cards up Europe's sleeve, so to say. Its leverage point. More than 200 billion euros are lying of Russian frozen assets are lying in European countries. Whilst many European countries want now this money to actually be used to help Ukraine's defenses, to help rebuild Ukraine, but some others do not. Belgium particularly has vetoed it. More than 180 billion euros is lying in a financial depository here. Belgium's point of view is they could get in legal trouble later and they may be asked by Russia to pay back. Italy then has joined in. Bulgaria has joined in. They're all saying, look for alternatives. So what we're going to see over the next 2 days is whether there'll be consensus. Will Belgium be won over by other European allies, or will they actually think of alternative ways to somehow organize funds that Ukraine needs for the next year? That is 100 billion euros if it is at war, 70 billion in peacetime, and it needs half of that from European or other partners. So can the Europeans actually agree to sort of provide these funds?
Yeah, show me the money. That is definitely what the Ukrainians are waiting to see if it happens or not. Anshal Vora for us in Brussels and Sergei Satanovsky for us in Riga. To both of you, thank you.